Hello, I'm Kristina Guzaitienė. I work in Lithuanian Zoo, and today I will present the breeding of Osmoderma barnabita in the Lithuanian Zoo. I will speak about the establishment of XC2 population, also about the growing and rearing of the larva, about their wintering, and removal of the larvae and cocoons to nature. The Lithuanian Zoo as a partner takes part in this project as a partner. And in this project, my main task was and is breeding of Osmoderma barnabita and also establishment of the population in the Lithuanian Zoo, and also preparation of the methodology for breeding of the beetle. Why do we need to breed these beetles in the Lithuanian Zoo? There can be such a question, but one of the purposes is recreation of the population in the managed historical finding places. And one of those places is Neris River Valley at Verkei, and while having population in the Lithuanian Zoo, we can easier achieve this goal and implement our tasks. Several works about Osmoderma barnabita. This beetle is a demanding beetle for the habitats. It needs deciduous trees, hundreds years old, and the beetle lives for about 1 month. And for the larva to become a beetle, it needs from 2 to 4 years. Therefore, while breeding Osmoderma barnabita, one has to be very patient. Before breeding the beetles, we had had any successful example in growing them in laboratory conditions where we could go, look and see and apply. Therefore, there was a certain challenge for me, but having consulted specialists in Lithuania and abroad about the successes and failures of breeding, and using my own experience, and until then I bred several species of the beetles which do not live in Lithuania, and so this is how we started implementing our works. First of all, we had to receive an Osmoderma barnabita in order to breed them. Therefore, the beetles were caught using pheromone traps. And these traps were hanged in summertime when beetles are flying on their trunks, on their oak trunks. And traps were checked every day from June to the middle of August. And they were hanged in Kaunas Oak Park, in different locations of the park. Why did we select Kaunas Oak Park? Because it contains the biggest population of Osmoderma barnabita. For the establishment of the population, we had to collect them for 3 years, from 2019 to 2021. The first year, 2019, we caught 15 of them. In 2020, 38, and in 2021, 39. The first year, we caught much less of the beetles because we hanged less traps. Next year, we attached more of them, 10, and so the number was bigger. This number included females and males, both of them, and 3, 4 females and 1 male usually. Caught beetles are transferred to the breeding boxes. And here we see the substrate in the breeding box. It consists of the composted oak leaves, composted for 12 months. They are collected every year, every time new leaves. This year we didn't do that because they haven't fallen down, those leaves. And then before using, they're mechanically shredded, and another part of the substrate is tiny rot of the oak. Now the substrate and this content is 50-60% of the shredded pendulum oak leaves and 40-50% rot. All that is mixed and put into the special boxes. 30-60 liters capacity. They are covered with lids, and then special air ventilation holes are cut out, then covered with a mesh, and so Osmoderma barnata is inhabited in them. And they were fed with different exotic fruit. And we had no any questions or doubts because it was obvious that they liked those exotic fruit. And they were replaced every day to have them fresh. Some 10-15 individuals who were bred in each box, and those boxes were kept in dark premises. And during the breeding period, which is June and August, temperature was from 20 to 22, and relative humidity 75-85%. Already after 2-4 weeks, we found eggs and larvae of the beetle. On the first picture on the left, we see 2 eggs of the beetle. They are of a different color and of a different size. That depends on the time when the egg was laid down into the soil. So that small one is a newly laid egg, and the other one, the bigger one, is an older egg. And on the right side, we see a larva, 1-2 days of age, about 7 millimeters in size. And although we detect both larvae and eggs after 2-4 weeks in those breeding boxes, but I don't recommend to look for them. Why? Because those eggs and larvae are so tiny and they're very fragile, then can be destroyed, and we can lose them. And on this picture on the right side, you see an egg with a content released, and that means that this egg is already lost. So when should we look at the content? After some 60-90 days, then you can do that, because the larva is quite grown up and no more eggs. All larvae have already hatched, and it is best to do in September, in the beginning of September, when the temperature is in average about 15 degrees, and larvae haven't shifted to the wintering period, not yet, and they're of the size that they can be easily detected. Checking of the breeding boxes. They are weighed, sorted by the size up to 1 gram and above 1 gram. Sorted larvae are shifted, transferred to the special breeding boxes, 30-60 larvae per each box. And all those boxes are stored in a dark environment. And the wintering period is very important for larvae when temperature drops down up to 0 degrees. Here on the pictures, we see larvae of several months in age, which hatch from the eggs laid in the same year. And they were up to 1 gram or above 1 gram, and most often they are about 15-20 millimeters in length. And here we see larvae which are 1-2 years. They are big, as you see. They are not so fragile anymore as those little ones, about 50 millimeters in length, and they weigh around 5-8 grams. When they feed themselves and when they grow, so the composite parts of the substrate starts to change because of the excrements, and you see excrements, and they perform a certain function during the period of the development of the larva, and also in the formation of the cocoons of the larva. As I mentioned before, it is very important to bear in mind the wintering period of larvae, and it is before wintering larvae form cavities, the so-called chambers, and it is great when those cavities, those chambers are formed at the walls of the plastic boxes. Then it is really great and enjoyable and informative to watch them when they form those chambers at the walls, how they winter, and when those chambers are left by them. You see the wintering chamber and the wintering larva inside, shown by the arrows. But other larvae are more clever larvae. They create their chambers in bigger rot of the tree, and we see how larva did its own chamber in a rot and is wintering in it. And this is how empty chambers look like, left by larvae, and just empty cavities remained. And other larvae, which reach the LT3 stage, and before wintering, they don't form chambers anymore. They are preparing themselves for the other stage. And they spend that wintering in the cocoons. They form their cocoons from the substrate in the environment. They winter in it, and later on they develop, they hatch, and in summertime, beautiful Osmoderma barnabita beetle shows. We have already seen this table as to how many beetles were captured. And then it's interesting how many of the larvae were counted. So in 2019, we counted 324 larvae. In 2020, 584 larvae. And in 2021, this year, we calculated, we counted 539 larvae. This quantity will change a little bit because we will continue our calculations in springtime. And larvae, as Adela mentioned, are transferred to nature. On the picture, you see that moment in Verkey Park, where two the so-called nesting boxes were constructed filled with rot and oak leaves, and we transferred part of the larvae and cocoons to those boxes. In 2020, we transferred 160 larvae. We had no any cocoons at that time, but this year 281 larvae was transferred and 80 cocoons. The other part of the larva is grown in the Lithuanian zoo and continues with their development cycle. And this year, next year, we plan to transfer a similar number of them as this year. That's all from my part, and thank you for listening to me. There's a question. During the project, genetic research was carried out of Osmoderma barnabita, and results were compared with the data received in Latvia. And so directions of the population dissemination and their directions were attempted to be established. But I cannot answer to this question. Maybe Latvian colleagues would be better able to answer this question. Yes, of course. We'll have presentations by our colleagues from Latvia, and they will be able to tell more about that. And another question, and also a comment, a very excellent presentation, very interesting. How do you maintain the needed humidity level in those breeding boxes? How do you maintain it? Humidity is maintained by spraying, simply by spraying. We spray water, and when we see that it's too dry in the boxes, and that the level of humidity is low, then and we have a hydrometer which measures that, and so we decide whether we need to spray or not. And then you gain experience, and when you see that the wall of the box is transparent, so then you know how things have to be and how they are. So you select oak rot as a substrate. Why maple trees or other trees are not good? Since we try to recreate as natural nature conditions as possible, and most often these beetles live in oak trees. Therefore, we decided to recreate mm, mostly natural conditions, and therefore we chose oak rot and oak leaves. And of course, other leaves can be included among oak leaves. But yes, we try to recreate the natural conditions for our beetle. That's why we have chosen oaks and oak leaves.